Alright, so this is going to be part 3 to What If Deku Had Gentle's Quirk. In the last part, we just got done with the Heroes vs. Villains test, as well as the Quirk assessment. And then we ended off with All Might having that conversation with Deku about a certain vigilante having the same quirk as him. So that's where we're going to start off from. But before that we get into that, I'd like to say that I appreciate everyone who likes and comments down below. And with that being said, if we could get to 50 likes on this video, I very much appreciate that. And it does let me know that you guys want a second or a third or even a fourth part. So in the last part, we just got done with that conversation, right? So from what you guys told me in the comments, you guys want Deku to have one for all. So that's what we're going to give him sooner than later, I guess you could say. So they would have been in the infirmary in UA, and this is where All Might says that Deku has a certain type of quirk very similar to someone that he's been seeing in some viral videos, and that is elasticity. Not only that, but he also has a similar quirk to the kid that was in the video, and even looks somewhat like him in terms of like the same body type. And he asked Deku firmly, "Is this you? Do you know this person?" And Deku can't really lie to his, number one hero, All Might. And Deku thinks about it for a second, and he asks All Might, "What if it was? What are you gonna do? What are you gonna do to the people in the video?" And All Might says nothing but they need to do it through a proper way. They can't just go and do their own thing. They need to apply to become a hero. And this is where All Might kind of winks at Deku, and Deku knows that he's not really gonna get into major trouble, so he trusts All Might. He says, "Yes, that's me in the video, and it's my father. He never got a chance to become a hero because of what happened and how I was a teenage pregnancy. He had to really focus on supporting his I guess my mother at the time, and he couldn't focus on studies, and this caused him to get bad grades and eventually having to basically drop out. Then a spiral of unfortunate events happened and caused his depression, and he never really was able to try again." And this is where All Might looks at Deku and kind of understands, because this is a side of Hero Society that All Might doesn't really talk about too much, and that is the people who don't get to be heroes who really want to be. Especially those who might be, capable of becoming heroes, but just don't because of certain circumstances. Like, what if you can't afford to go to a certain school? What if your grades are a little bit not as desirable? What if something happens in your life where you just can't focus on school and you have to focus on that instead? And then it becomes harder and harder for people to become heroes with those certain circumstances. So All Might really does sympathize with Deku with this part, and he says, "I understand. Just give your dad this," and it's a card, and this card is basically a business opportunity to work at All Might's agency. So All Might does have some pull. He does have a lot of influence being the number one hero. So if he was to give someone a recommendation, then they would have a chance to become a hero. Obviously, they would have to go through some sort of course to have this happen, but I feel like it would be still possible. So Deku does accept it, and this is where he kind of smiles for the first time in a while, because although he does love his father, he hasn't really shown a real genuine smile in a very long time because of all the stuff that's happened to him. So he does smile for the first time and nearly cries at this opportunity to give his father something that he's always wanted. and it does give him a better chance as well as becoming a hero if his father's a hero. So that's what kind of happens at that point. All Might doesn't really think about giving him one for all just yet. Just calm down at this point. He will get it in the future, but not at this point. So after Deku gets healed from Recovery Girl, he ends up going home. So he gives his father the news, and his father is kind of like upset a little that he told All Might, but then Deku gives him the card, and he quickly calms down. And this is where he gets the card to go and try to work at his agency. So his agency is in Tokyo, so it is possible for him to it is possible, since the kind of transportation in Japan is very fast, or at least public transportation, because there's a lot of trains. So he would have been able to basically work in Tokyo and come back late at night, because he would have La Brava there to kind of help with the housework and with Deku if he were to need something. So he would have been able to go to Tokyo in the morning and then come back home at night. So this is where we kind of divulge from the normal plot. So this is where Gentle would get ready to go for his first day at this opportunity to go to All Might's agency. So he goes there in his kind of normal clothes, and he does have a bag with him, and this bag has his vigilante outfit in. So he goes in there with normal clothes on, and he's kind of awkward and really scared at this point. Not scared, but nervous, you could say. And he goes to the receptionist, and everyone that's there is kind of looking at him, because to them he looks like an old man. Then he gives him the card that All Might gave him, and they're all kind of shocked, because All Might doesn't really do this too often. So what happens is that he goes and sits down, and then he gets introduced to a couple other heroes. I'm not sure who's in All Might's agency just yet, so I won't say any names. But let's say that they take him back to a different room, and this is where he starts his kind of hero course, you could say. So he gets approved not only by the agency, but also through the government, because all the heroes are government workers technically. So yeah, after that we switch back to Deku's point of view, and this is where he goes back to school, and this is when the USJ is actually announced. So they are going to go to the USJ just as normal, but the same things before that also happen. That being the media, or the news, basically going into the school after Shigaraki destroys the doorway, and this causes panic in UA because they don't know who it is and they think it's a villain attack. Ito would have done the same thing, that being basically using Uraraka to float him above everyone else, getting everyone's attention and telling them to calm down. So that's basically what happens. And then for the kind of for the class representative, I think there would be a lot of people who would want Deku to win, just like in canon, because of how he won the heroes versus villains kind of test, using kind of that weird strategy he had with his quirk. So I think he would have been the one who won that just by a little bit, just how he does in canon, where I believe it was only 3 votes. So second place would obviously be Momo, because of how she was able to analyze the fight, and everyone was really impressed by that. So she gets vice representative, and this is where I guess we could skip a few days, and then this is where they have to go on the bus to go to the USJ, I guess you could say. Kind of rhymed. But anyways, so they go on the bus, and Froppy brings up the discussion about the strongest heroes in UA, or not the strongest heroes, but the strongest students in Class 1A. So they discuss Bakugo and Todoroki, But they also bring up Deku. They ask Deku what is his quirk, and also that it's very similar to someone that they've seen online. Someone that has the similar kind of quirk to him. And Deku says, well, I don't know, maybe it's not that rare. I mean, there's multiple people who have the same quirk and they're not even related. And if you don't know that, it is possible in the My Hero universe. Like, there was a character that had the same like quirk as, I think it was like it was one of those, it was that hero, I forgot his name, but he was able to become paper thin. There was like a random villain that had like the same like quirk as him, and they weren't related. So yeah, it is technically possible to do that. So they get on so to get back on topic, Deku says, well, I don't really know, it could just be someone who has the same quirk as me. Froppy says, alright, but it is kind of convenient that that is the case. So they ask him his quirk again, and he says that his quirk is elasticity. He can make anything he touches elastic, even something like the air. He can make it elastic. Basically, he uses to jump around everything. So Deku or Froppy's like, well, it's very good for defensive. It's a very defensive quirk, and it seems really good. So Deku's like, yeah, my father really trained me a lot on how to use it in smart ways, since he was never able to become a hero. At least he didn't. And Froppy's like, what do you mean? Or like, the way that that Deku worded it was implying that he can now be a hero. And Deku's like, oh, just don't worry about it. She kind of raises an eyebrow at him and just continues. And he talks about how Bakugo could be a great hero, but he has kind of an attitude problem, and Todoroki doesn't really care because he isn't really one to get into this conversation, at least just yet, especially how his personality is at this point. So later on, they get to the USJ. They open the doors and go inside. This is where they meet 13, and she says that speech about the quirks. And Deku knows this way too well, especially what happened to his father. He was trying to use quirk to help someone, but ended up killing them instead. So he does very much know the limits, or not limits, but the responsibility he has in not to abuse his quirk. So he knows this way too well. So after that, they try to go to the other places in the USJ, and this is where this kind of gateway opens up. What comes out of the portal or the gateway is a bunch of villains, as well as one that's particularly large with a exposed brain, and someone next to him with a bunch of hands covering all parts of his body. So Aizawa goes down there and tells the class that it's not a test, that this is a real attack, and he's going to go fight him. Deku sees this, and he decides to go with Aizawa. So he goes down there, and Aizawa tells him to back off, that he should stay with 13 so that he could be safe. And Deku says, no, I've dealt with villains before, because he really has. Not really to the extreme as someone like Shiraki maybe, but he has dealt with many villains. So that's what he does. He helps Aizawa with the villains, using the compressed air to launch him everywhere to fight the villains. And any villains that would have like hit Aizawa, he uses the elastic air to reflect anything that hits him. And this is where Shiraki's like basically looking at what's happening, and he looks at Deku. He's like, who is that? Like, he has such a weird quirk. It's really almost broken. He has so much defense with that, and you can't really tell what's going to be elastic or not until you touch it. So this is where he starts to kind of remember something he'd seen before, and he has no real good memory of it because he didn't really care. Shiraki didn't really care about the vigilante. so he didn't pay attention too well, but he remembers something like that on a video before, but he can't really put his finger on it. So eventually they take out all the villains that are there, and this is where the Nomu are. This is where Shigaraki tries to fight Aizawa, because he knows that his kind of quirk is based off sight, where he figures that out. He tries to fight Aizawa, and this is where Deku puts a elastic kind of air wall between Aizawa and Shigaraki, and this is where Shigaraki's kind of trying to touch Aizawa, but he can't, and it's not like he can decay the air. But so from Aizawa's perspective, it just looks like he's trying to go through like plastic wrap, if that makes sense. It's kind of what happened with the Deku versus Gentle fight. So after that, Deku's like gentle rebound, and this is where Shigaraki's basically thrown back, and this is where Shigaraki's like, what was that? It felt like I couldn't, like the air pushed me back. And then this is where he tells the Nomu to go and fight Shigaraki, or fight Aizawa. So we could determine the strength of Gentle's quirk by using Deku trying to go through it, or in that fight at the beginning. So we could say that either Deku's using 20% or 8% when he uses his full cowl to jump at Gentle. If we say 20, then just because there wasn't a point where, in the Gentle fight, he uses a technique called Gentle Sandwich, where he puts multiple layers of elastic air above Deku, and Deku does get out of this, but he doesn't go out of it by breaking or going through all the air or the elastic air that's above him, but instead going from the side where there was no compressed or was no elastic air. So we never really seen Deku being able to break through it, so we don't know whether or not it is possible. We know a 20 or a 28% was able to block him, so we could say that we could say that at least 5 or at least between 5 and 20, or I believe it was between 5 and between 5 and I believe to 14 maybe, that could block him, but it's very hard to tell because we've never really seen how far Gentle could take his quirk. So let's say that for the bare minimum, we could round up a little bit. So instead of the minimum 8%, the minimum would be 10%, and then the maximum would have been, instead of 22, or instead of 20%, let's say it's 22% at the very least, because we don't know if it's higher. So after that, the Nomu would try to fight Aizawa, and he would go for a punch, right? And this is where Aizawa would use his quirk against him. It really wouldn't make a difference, and Deku would try to use elastic air to block the punch, just the same way he did with Shigaraki. So it does slow the punch a lot, but he ends up still punching Aizawa, knocking him a bit. So they said the Nomu was around the same strength as All Might in his prime, but it's not. Obviously, it's not in his prime. It's the same All Might strength that he is now, which is a little bit less than it was in the past. So it would have been able to really block most of the punch because of the elastic air. So Aizawa isn't knocked back too far and isn't really hurt too much, and this is where Shigaraki tries to go for Deku, knowing that he's the one doing this. He goes for Deku and it doesn't work. He just sees another elastic air. So he tries to go for Deku, it does the same thing. He can't really touch him. The elastic air is blocking him. So Shigaraki starts to kind of scratch his neck furiously, saying that it isn't fair. He can't really block or really beat him at this point because his defense is just too much. So he tries to get the Nomu to do it, and this is the point where Todoroki would have been done, as well as Baku and the rest of the kind of Class 1A boys that were there before All Might came, or a little bit after All Might came. So this is where they would have helped Deku out by basically freezing the Nomu, and instead of freezing only his half side, I think Todoroki would have frozen all the way to the neck. And this is where Aizawa basically tells Todoroki to keep on freezing him because it's not human. So he continues to do so, and he basically freezes him until he's a block of just pure ice. And Shigaraki's like scratching his neck, going, what type of quirk is that? And he realizes that this is Endeavor's kid, and he just gets more mad and mad, not knowing what to do. And this is where the rest of the heroes would come, and he would get shot by Snipe. He wouldn't get shot in all limbs, but he would get shot probably twice. After that, this is where Kurogiri would cover him in smoke and basically teleport him out of there. The rest of the heroes would take out the villains that were still up and save any student that was in danger. So Aizawa would thank Deku for his help, and in this one, Aizawa wouldn't be as hurt as he was in the series because of Deku using his quirk to really protect him. So that's what Deku was doing in this fight mostly. He was just on the defense trying to help Aizawa in some offense with the lower villains, but you know that the Nomu was a power type, so he really had to focus on defense if they wanted to wait until the heroes came. It was really lucky that Todoroki was there to help him to kind of freeze the Nomu. So they would have dispatched the Nomu relatively quickly, and he wouldn't be able to regenerate because his brain would be no longer alive. So yeah. So this can be the end of the video. If you made it to the end of the video, please comment down CS. If you like this video, please give it a like. And if you like more of my content, please subscribe. So with that being said, that's gonna be the end of the video. So yeah.